I want you to shake this room like it has never been shook before as we bring the people's champion to the stage, Senator Bernie Sanders.
Reading, thank you very much. This is a fantastic turnout. I just want to thank everybody for being here. And I want to thank all of the folks who are up here speaking from their hearts and telling you the story of their lives and how we are going to transform America and create a government that works for all of us, not just the 1%. And I want to especially thank Nina Turner. And I want to thank Senator Turner, not just for being with me on this trip and doing a great job, but I want to thank her for undertaking a task which is perhaps the most important work that anybody in America could be doing. She is running all over this country, creating a political revolution. And what she knows, and what I know, and what you all know, is that revolution is not about Nina Turner, it's not about Bernie Sanders, it is about you. Now, the way the system works is the establishment tells people, we have all of the power, we got all of the money, we have all of the media, we determine whether you work or you don't work, we decide whether your job goes to China or whether it stays here. You are powerless, you're nothing, we got it all. But what we are here to say today is that what the political revolution is about is the understanding that when we stand together, they can't stop us. And when we don't allow Trump and his friends to divide us up based on the color of our skin or our religion or where we were born or our sexual orientation, when we stand together, respect each other, love each other, we will create a government that works for all of us. Now, I am more than aware that here in Pennsylvania, your state voted by a small margin for Donald Trump for president. And I'm here knowing that here in Berks County, he did pretty well. I know that. I know that, and that is exactly why I am here. Because today I want to speak not only to those of you who are progressives, I want to speak to some of the people who supported Mr. Trump for president. No, I don't boo. Nope. I understand. Look, in my view, the vast majority, not all, but the vast majority of the people in Pennsylvania and around this country who voted for Mr. Trump, I do not believe that they are racist or sexist or homophobes or xenophobes. What I believe is they are people who are hurting, people who are in pain. And Trump said some things during his campaign that they responded to. That's what I believe. But what I want to tell those people tonight is that virtually everything that Trump told them during the campaign turned out to be a lie. And I think it is increasingly clear to most Americans, including many who voted for Mr. Trump, that he never had any intention of fulfilling the campaign promises that he made to the people of Pennsylvania or Vermont or any place else in this country. So I'm not here blaming people for voting for Mr. Trump, but I am here tonight to give you just a few examples of what Trump said and what Trump did. Now, you may all recall during the campaign, President Trump, as a candidate, he said some things that made sense. He said, quote, he would provide health insurance to everybody. Well, wait a minute. That's a good idea. I believe in that. He said as a candidate, he would provide health insurance to everybody, and I suspect there were people here in Berks County and throughout the state who said, you know what, that's right, I'm going to vote for Mr. Trump. But as president, in terms of health care, instead of supporting health care for everybody, what he ended up doing was supporting legislation that would throw 32 million Americans off of the health insurance they have. Now, health care for everybody is a little bit different than throwing 32 million people off of health insurance. During the campaign, candidate Trump promised that he was going to stop the pharmaceutical companies from getting away with murder. Remember that? But once again, I can understand, and I want you to understand, why people would have voted for Trump. Because you know what? He's exactly right in what he said. The drug companies today are ripping us off right and left. Just the other day, we were in Ohio, and we were leaving the arena where we were at, and a fellow who was working there, with tears in his eyes, literally with tears in his eyes, was telling me, Bernie, I'm paying $1,800 a month. This is a working class guy for medicine I desperately need. In my own state of Vermont, I've talked to older people who are dividing their pills in half. As a senator, we get letters from oncologists who tell us my cancer patients can't afford the medicine they need to keep them alive. So I can understand why somebody would vote for a Donald Trump who promised that he would take on the pharmaceutical industry. But that's what he said as a candidate. As president, Donald Trump nominated a pharmaceutical industry executive to be the head of the Health and Human Services Agency. And this is a guy, this nominee, has spent his entire career jacking up the price of insulin and other life-saving prescription drugs. In other words, when Trump said he was going to lower prescription drug costs in this country, he was lying. Candidate Trump, when he was running for office, he said he was going to drain the swamp, and that he was the only candidate who could stop Wall Street from getting away with murder. Well, God knows we have got to stop Wall Street from the greed that they have perpetrated on the American people, which led to the worst economic downturn in the modern history of this country. Donald Trump was right as a candidate in saying those words. And again, I could understand why people in Reading and elsewhere said, you know what? People on Wall Street are a bunch of crooks. And I'm glad that candidate Trump is talking about taking them on. That's what he said during the campaign. But as president, Donald Trump has appointed more billionaires to his cabinet than any president in American history. His chief economic advisor, Gary Cohn, is the former president of Goldman Sachs, and his Secretary of Treasury, Steve Mnuchin, you know Steve, also comes from Wall Street. Hey, President Trump, you don't drain the swamp by filling your administration with executives that come from Goldman Sachs, ExxonMobil, and big drug companies. That is the swamp. So my point here to the people of Reading and Berks County is I can understand with so many problems out there with a middle class that is shrinking, with people working 2 or 3 jobs, I can understand why somebody would have voted for Donald Trump. But my point today is that on virtually every issue, what Trump said during the campaign is the exact opposite of what he is doing as president. Now, just the other night, on Friday night, I had hoped to be in Louisville, Kentucky at an event like this, but unfortunately, at 2 o'clock in the morning, as I was on the floor of the United States Senate. And I was there along with your Senator Bob Casey, and he and I were trying to do everything that we could to defeat one of the most unfair pieces of legislation ever passed in the modern history of this country. Now, President Trump, just a week ago in Missouri, he said that, he is a billionaire, but that he and other wealthy people will not be the major beneficiaries of this legislation. And he said it's really a bill written for the middle class and working families. Once again, I say to the people of Berks County, President Trump is lying. I wish I could be more nuanced in my words. But a lie is a lie is a lie. According to every independent study done on this legislation, it is very clear that this bill gives huge, if I may use that word, huge tax breaks to the very rich, raises taxes on many millions of middle-class families, leaves 13 million more Americans without health insurance, raises premiums, health premiums, by over 10% a year, and raises the deficit by $1.4 trillion. Oh, and by the way, in a manufacturing state like Pennsylvania, you should know that by lowering taxes for companies that invest abroad, it will make it easier for large corporations to shut down in America, throw our workers out on the street, and move to China, Mexico, and elsewhere. What this legislation does is provide 62% of the tax benefits to the top 1%. Meanwhile, by the end of the decade, 87 million middle-class households will be paying more in taxes. Now, why is that? It is because the tax breaks in the bill for middle-class families expire by the end of 2025, while you will be shocked to learn that the tax breaks for large corporations are made permanent. Now think about it for a minute. If you look at what is going on in our country, you all understand that we are experiencing today more income and wealth inequality than at any time since the late 1920s. Today in America, the top 1/10 of 1% now owns as much wealth as the bottom 90%. 52% of all new income goes to the top 1%. If you can believe this, the three wealthiest people in America, 1, 2, 3, now own as much wealth as the bottom half of our country. Now, why in God's name, when the middle class is shrinking, when people in Vermont and in Reading are working 2 or 3 jobs, when moms can't afford child care for their kids, when older workers are scared to death about facing retirement, why in God's name would anybody support legislation that provides 62% of the benefits to the top 1%? And that is a question that you might want to ask Senator Toomey, one of the leading advocates. And Senator Toomey was one of the leading advocates, I must tell you, for this bill. Now, the President of the United States, Senator Toomey, will tell you that trickle-down economics, giving huge tax breaks to the rich and large corporations, will expand the economy, it will create new jobs, and it will bring in so much revenue that it will pay for the deficit that it creates. As Nina Turner just told you, trickle-down economics is a trick, it's a fraud, it has never worked, and it never will work. It is just a rationalization to give tax breaks to the people who don't need it. It failed under Reagan, it failed under George W. Bush, and it most recently failed in Kansas, where it turned out to be a total disaster. Now, The Joint Committee on Taxation has told us that this bill will increase the deficit by $1.4 trillion over the next decade. Now, why is that important? It's important for at least two reasons. Number one, it really is irresponsible to leave our kids and our grandchildren with the debt that we refuse to address today. That's just unfair. You don't say to the young people of America, hey, I've got a great gift for you. It's a $20 trillion debt. I didn't have the guts to deal with it. I'm going to let you pick it up. That's irresponsible. But it is more than irresponsible. I want to read you for a second an article that appeared in the New York Times today. Bear with me. Headline, heading toward tax victory, Republicans eye next step, cut spending. As the tax cut legislation, this is today's New York Times, as the tax cut legislation passed by the Senate early Saturday hurdles toward final approval, Republicans are preparing to use, now listen to this, to use the swelling deficits made worse by the package as a rationale to pursue their long-held vision, undoing the entitlements of the New Deal and Great Society, leaving government leaner and the safety net skimpier for millions of Americans. Speaker Paul Ryan and other Republicans are beginning to express their big dreams publicly, vowing that next year they will move on to changes in Medicare and Social Security. President Trump told the Missouri rally last week, quote, we're going to go into welfare reform, end quote. In other words, to all of the seniors in Berks County, congratulations. They think that Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid are welfare. Now, I want to read you something, getting back to what I said a minute ago about a president who, when he was a candidate, saying one thing and after the election doing another. This is a direct quote from candidate Donald Trump, March 29th, 2016. Quotes during a campaign speech. Quote, you know, Paul Ryan wants to knock out Social Security, knock it down, way down. He wants to knock Medicare way down. And frankly, well, two things. Number one, you're going to lose the election if you're going to do that. I'm not going to cut it. And I'm not going to raise ages, and I'm not going to do all of the things that they want to do. But they want to really cut it, and they want to cut it very substantially, the Republicans, and I am not going to do that. End of quote. Donald Trump, candidate. Brothers and sisters, and President Trump, today I'm talking to you, Mr. President. Mr. President, you told the American people time and time again you are not going to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Today, get on the phone. Tell Paul Ryan, tell Mitch McConnell you will veto any bill that comes to your desk that cuts Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. But my friends, what the Republicans want to do, and the Times had it right, this is the dream of the Koch brothers and other billionaires. Their dream from 40 years ago or longer has been to give massive tax breaks to billionaires and to undo virtually every major piece of legislation, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, federal aid to education, nutrition programs for the hungry. Their dream has been to undo those programs, give massive tax breaks to people who don't need them, and take us back to the 1920s. And we are here today in Reading to tell the Republican leadership and the president, you are not going to get away with that. Now, there's an interesting political aspect to all of this, and that is what poll after poll shows is that virtually every proposal coming from the Republicans is wildly unpopular. Wildly unpopular. Their health care proposal to repeal the Affordable Care Act, had 15 or 20% of the American people supporting it. Republicans didn't support it. Democrats, independents didn't support it. You go out here in Reading and you ask anybody who voted for Trump, say, do you think it's a good idea to give tax breaks to billionaires and cut Social Security and Medicare? And they will tell you, you are nuts to think for a minute that that makes sense. So my question to you is, if the American people don't want to throw 30 million of their fellow Americans off of health care, if they don't want to give very large tax breaks to billionaires and cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, why are the Republicans doing these things? And the answer can be found in 3 words: follow the money. Over the last many, many years, especially since this disastrous Supreme Court decision on Citizens United, billionaires like the Koch brothers and others have been pouring hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars into the Republican Party to elect candidates who will do exactly what happened on Friday night. And if you can believe it, in preparation for this disastrous piece of legislation, 6,000 lobbyists were working in Washington to make sure that the corporations they work for get their piece of the pie. 6,000 lobbyists to work on a bill which allows 62% of the benefits to go to the top 1% and to large multinational corporations. Now, it seems to me, when we think about where we are politically, our job is threefold. First of all, we have got to do everything that we can to defeat this horrific piece of legislation. Now, a bill passed the House a number of weeks ago, passed the Senate Friday night. They are different bills, and in all likelihood, they're going to go to a conference committee to work out the differences. That means at a time when the Republicans wrote these pieces of legislation behind closed doors, at a time when in the Senate they did not have one hearing because they do not want the American people to know what's in this legislation, our job is to tell every American exactly what is in this legislation. And that's what we need to do in the next several weeks. The second thing we need to do is to stand up and oppose all of the ugly policies and all of the ugly tweets and everything else that's coming from the White House. Some of you may have seen a particularly ugly tweet last week, an incredibly bigoted anti-Muslim tweet. And this tweet was so bad that the conservative Prime Minister of the United Kingdom condemned President Bush. President Trump. No. But can you imagine how absurd we look around the world when we have a president who is condemned by the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, our historical ally, who happens to be, she's a member and a leader of the Conservative Party over there. So our job every day is to fight Trump when he tries to divide us up. You know, historically, every president, including George W. Bush, conservative presidents, Ronald Reagan, understand that maybe the most important function of a president is to bring the American people together. Bring us together. And in an unprecedented way, Trump is moving in exactly the opposite direction. So that's number two of what we've got to do. But number three, we've got to work hard to defeat this very bad legislation. We've got to oppose Trump's policies and his ideas. But number three, we need to do something more. What we have got to do, it is not good enough just to attack Trump every day. What we have got to do is give hope to the American people, inspire the American people with a vision that actually speaks to their needs. In other words, what our job is to talk to our neighbors and our co-workers, to understand the reality of people's lives, to talk to the mom who can't find affordable child care for her kid, to talk to the high school student whose dream it is to get a college education, but she can't afford to go to college, to talk to the senior, to the fellow who has been working for 50 years, but is now scared to death about retirement because he has no money in the bank, to talk to the college graduates out there who every month are paying off their student debt in a way that hampers their ability to function. We have got to talk to the American people and put together an agenda that makes sense to them. And one part of that agenda is certainly when we deal with taxation, and we have the vast majority of the American people on our side. When the American people think about taxation today, what they say is, no, we should not be giving tax breaks to billionaires. We have got to demand that they start paying their fair share of taxes. And again, when we talk about the economy, what the American people understand is that while the very rich are becoming much richer, we got people here in Pennsylvania and Vermont who can't make it on 10, 11, 12 bucks an hour, and we got to raise the minimum wage to a living wage, 15 bucks an hour. And the American people, again, across the political spectrum, Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, progressives, understand that in the year 2017, it is absurd that women are working for 80 cents on the dollar compared to men. That we need pay equity, equal pay for equal work. And by the way, we should make sure that it is women who control their bodies, not the United States government. Now, Donald Trump and his friends think that health care reform is throwing 30 million people off of the health insurance they have. Our idea is a little bit different and a lot more popular. Our idea says, how does it happen that the United States of America, our great country, is the only major nation on earth not to guarantee health care to all people as a right, not a privilege? And that is why, with your support, we introduced a single-payer Medicare for all legislation. I live 50 miles away from the Canadian border, and a couple of months ago I was up in Toronto, Canada, looking at their hospitals and talking to their doctors. And we went into the hospital and they allowed us to talk to some of the patients, some of whom were recovering from surgery. And they said, when we are ill, when we have surgery, our job is just to focus on how we can get well and not have to worry about how we pay the damn bill. And in Canada, they can go to the doctor anytime they want and not have to take out their wallet. No deductibles, no co-payments. And when I talk to the doctors, we had a long discussion with a whole bunch of doctors. They said, look, we are able to focus on how best to treat our patients and not have to worry whether the patient could afford this or that procedure. We do what's right for the patient. Now, if Canada and the UK and Germany and France and all of Scandinavia, if every major country on earth can guarantee health care to all their people and do it at 50% of the cost that we spend in this country, don't tell me we can't do it here in the United States. Trump and his friends think that giving tax breaks to billionaires are going to create jobs. They're wrong, but I will tell you what will create 15 million jobs, and that is $1 trillion invested in rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. Let's put our people to work rebuilding our roads and our bridges and our water systems. And I'll tell you what else we need. In a competitive global economy, I want our nation to have the best educated workforce in the world. Every day, the economy is changing, technology is rapidly changing. Most of the new decent-paying jobs now require more than a high school degree. In my view, the time is now, when we speak about public education, to make every public college and university tuition free. And I'll tell you how else we can create millions of jobs. Trump is dangerously wrong when he thinks that climate change is a hoax. No, Mr. President, climate change is not a hoax. It is the great environmental crisis facing this planet. And we have a moral responsibility for our kids and our grandchildren to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energies. The jobs of the future are not with fossil fuel, they're with solar, they're with wind, they're with geothermal. And our agenda understands that instead of demonizing immigrants, we're going to move to comprehensive immigration reform and a path toward citizenship. And if you are a progressive or a conservative, you understand there is something very wrong when we are spending $80 billion a year at the local, state, and federal level, locking up 2.2 million Americans. Think about it for a minute. In America today, we have over 2 million people in jail, significantly, largely, disproportionately African American, Latino, and Native American. We have more people in jail than the communist authoritarian country of China, which is 4 times our size. What we have got to do is, instead of building more jails, we've got to invest in education and jobs, not more incarceration. Let me conclude by telling you what you will not see on TV. And that is, amidst all of the problems, some of which I have discussed, others that I have not, the great crisis facing America today is the very strong drift toward an oligarchic form of society. That is a society in which a handful of billionaires control not only our economy, but our political life as well. And these billionaires, not all of them, but many of them, led by the Koch brothers, suffer from a very serious problem. Now, I know here in Pennsylvania and in my own state of Vermont and around this country, we have a very, very tragic problem in terms of an addiction epidemic with regarding opioids and heroin. Addiction is a terrible problem, and we're going to have to address that problem. But I will tell you, there is another sickness out there that is relevant in particular for the billionaire class. They are addicted to greed. You might think that the Koch brothers, who are worth some $90 billion, you might think that one family worth $90 billion might think that that is enough money. You might think that they would believe that you don't have to cut Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and children's health programs in order to make them even richer. But their greed never ends. And our job is to provide a cure for their greed. Our job is to tell them that enough certainly is enough. They've got all they're ever going to get. And our job is to create an economy that works for the children here in Reading, to make sure they get the education and the health care they need. So, brothers and sisters, what we are about, what Nina Turner and many of us are working on, and where we need your help, is help us make the political revolution. In this room, there are great candidates for school board and city council and state legislature and Congress and Senate. There are people who can come together to make sure we have the quality education and health care and environmental protection our people deserve. We are living in a pivotal moment in American history, and the outcome is not yet clear. On one side, you have a small number of billionaires who want it all, and on the other side are tens of millions of people who are struggling for a decent standard of living. Our job is to bring our people together, to become involved in the political process in a way that we have never done before. Our job is not to let Trump and his friends to divide us up. Our job is to stand together. And when we do that, there is nothing that we cannot accomplish. Thank you all very much.